I remember that moment. Yeah. I know that little girl. Yes, it's the latest.
We got to talk about that. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Rolling. All right. Good evening. Thanks for coming. It's good to see everybody. I appreciate you. I appreciate your presence, and much thanks, especially to everyone on this panel. Most definitely, Ahmed Abdullah, composer, trumpeter, educator, music director at Sister's Place, music in the community through actual example, Basir Mchawi, educator, host of the show Education at the Crossroads on WBAI, Thursday nights at 8, editor of Black News Magazine, Black News Publications, Kamosi Woodard, educator, Spirit House member and professor. Seafoam, yes.
Seafoam.
And this is
like Newark.
Yeah. This is a recurring series of discussions called Jazz and Self-Determination, focused on the music's role in a functional way and the parallel social, political, and cultural developments in conjunction with the changes in the music, because they're all tied together. And just to give a little context, it's kind of coming from my personal experience as a youngster, being taken to the East Cultural Center by my father, who frequented that cultural center quite often and took me with him sometime, and paying homage to my the memories of the energy from that time. And I have a tendency to use that as a point of reference in discourses about supposedly what the Black community can or can't understand, or a lot of misinformation about the role of creative music wherever people of African descent are, and challenging their supposed lack of understanding of certain changes in music, which I know not to be true from actual example. And I bring people on these panels who are pretty much integral to that particular premise. And as for example, Mr. Ahmed and Mr. Basir, they were on a couple of other panels as well, and I appreciate their contributions. It's such a great learning experience, and I appreciate sharing this with you as well. And Ahmed, Mr. Ahmed, you were involved with the New York Musicians Association, which was located downtown but had a similar premise as far as the organization of the musicians and the organization of the musicians playing quote-unquote new music. And what was that? What were the factors that led to that development?
The New York Musicians Festival, or the New York Musicians Organization, which then evolved into New York Musicians Festival, was about artists in New York addressing the fact that jazz artists were addressing the fact that they were going to be left out of a very huge festival that was about to come to New York, which was George Weems' festival. It was going to come to New York in 1972, but it didn't seem like many of the musicians in New York who've been working in New York were going to be included in the festival. So musicians organized. They were led by James Du Bois, had a club called Studio We, which was on Eldridge Street down on the Lower East Side. James Du Bois, Juma Sultan, and Ali Aboui, and a number of other people who were involved in that, organized the musicians in New York into New York Musicians Festival. And what we did was, the first year that George Weems came to New York, the New York Musicians Festival challenged George Weems' Newport Jazz Festival, because there were thousands of musicians who were left out because he was only dealing with the marquee names. And so what happened though was that many people supported our efforts in the city, and we were able to do our own independent festival in 1972. And we did this around parks around New York City, and it actually must have caused some kind of anxiety for George Weems, because he then wanted to negotiate with us to, so that in 1973, the same thing wouldn't happen. Yeah, and so that's what he did. He negotiated with the New York Musicians Festival musicians who didn't really understand the business as they should have. So basically, in 1973, the New York Musicians Festival was co-opted by George Weems' Festival, and we were part of George Weems' Festival, and we played at Alice Tully Hall in Lincoln Center. It was all very nice, and we got our $100, and that was it.
Yeah, all too familiar scenario. And also a parallel aspect of your musical involvement was when you joined Sunrise Orchestra, your very first performance, you told me, which I didn't know, was actually at the East Cultural Center. That was your very first performance as a member of Sunrise Orchestra.
Yes, Sunrise Orchestra. Now, see, if we're going to talk about Sunrise Orchestra, we just made a whole 180-degree turn. Because we talk about people who are not necessarily understanding self-determination to a person who totally understood self-determination. We talk about Sunrise, we talk about a person who came on the planet saying, I gotta find my way out of Birmingham, Alabama, because I can't find the information I need here to be who I am. So he lived in Birmingham, Alabama from the time he came on the planet, 1914, until the time he 1946. And he developed a whole life in Birmingham. Sunrise, a person who was given a piano at 11 years old and started playing it without anybody teaching him. Sunrise, a person who started taking music off the wide airwaves, music of Fletcher Henderson and Duke Ellington, and started notating it without anybody telling him how to do that. Sunrise was a different, you talk about Sunrise, that's a whole class. I teach a course on Sunrise, the new school, that started 3 weeks ago and will end like about 8 or 9 weeks later, because you can't really understand Sunrise without understanding the vastness of who he was. And therefore we understand something about who we are. Because, if there's one person who can exemplify this in life, that means that you got that in you somewhere too. You just got to find it.
Right. Yeah, and these discussions have been caught are called Jazz and Self-Determination and Sunrise, the embodiment of that. And how did you come to join his orchestra?
From the time, my parents grew up in Harlem, and I was born in 1947, right? So I grew up the first 16 years of my life in Harlem. And I heard, you know, the wealth of the music of Harlem was there when I grew up. I could hear it on the jukeboxes. Yeah, I could hear Cozy Cole, I could hear Charlie Parker, right? You know, I hear Jackie McLean, you know, all that was on the juke. All you had to do is put in a nickel, and you could hear this music. It was all around Harlem. You understand what I'm saying? You know, during the time that I grew up. But my parents moved from Harlem, you know, in the mid-1960s, and they moved down to the Lower East Side. They moved to Avenue D and 8th Street. Yeah, and on Avenue D and 8th Street, I was just, you know, a few blocks from a club that was to open up that was called Slugs. I was all of a teenager, right? And I was a teenager who was interested in the music. So at 16, I went to, I was telling Brother Gene this a moment ago, I went to Birdland to hear John Coltrane at 16 years old. And I looked old enough so they let me in to hear. But dig this, it was a triple bill, right? It was John Coltrane, it was Dizzy Gillespie, and it was Irene Reed, right? A triple bill. And I got to go in there for like about $1. You understand what I'm saying? You know what I mean? I was working at a library, the Donnell Library, as a page. I would take the books, you know, after they took the books, I would put them back on the shelf and stuff like that, you know what I mean? You know, so, but at the Educational Library, 53rd Street, I was right across the street from the Museum of Modern Art, you know, so I was right there, you know, being a person who grew up in New York has so many great advantages that you really don't understand. I mean, we have access to culture, right, that is unbelievable, you know, at our fingertips. So I got to hear Sun Ra in New York at Slugs. Yeah, as a teenager, I would go to hear him, you know, play on Monday nights. Yeah, and you know, I was, you know, long story short, when I first heard him, I was amazed. It was like, wow, you know, greatest music I ever heard, right? So I wanted to buy a recording from him, and so I talked to the person. Gene will know this because Gene was playing down there at Slugs with him, right? He, so one of the cats gave me a recording CD, you know, vinyl, right? And I was listening. It was Richard. It wasn't even Richard then, because even before Richard, you know. So I got the recording. I took it home. I listened to it, and I wasn't pleased because it wasn't what I had heard Sun Ra doing live. Because the recording was from 10 years ago, and he had already evolved from that in 1966. When I bought the recording, he's going somewhere else, but he hadn't recorded where he had gone, right? So, in my young, brash, 18-year-old beingness, I took the recording back to him and said, I want my money back. Now, you know, anybody who knows Sun Ra knows that he can reprimand you, and he can reprimand you for a long time. But he only told me a few words. He said, it's in there. Everything you need to know, it's in there. That's all he said, it's in there. And he said, take your little dumb ass home and listen. Because it's in there. Like that.
And you joined his orchestra in 74, 75?
I joined it in April 1975. I'll never forget the day. Okay. You know, yeah. My lady at the time was pregnant with twins. I was playing at the East. I was on the top of the world. I had just gone down and rehearsed with Sun Ra, who, you know, we thought was the greatest musician alive in the black community. You know, we just,
that's true.
You know, in the East, you know, really loved Sun Ra. You know, the musicians who played with Sun Ra worshiped Sun Ra. Said he was, man, he was, you know, he was it. So I was playing with the cat. You know, I had 2 babies coming, I didn't even know, to twin sons. You know, I'm playing in the black communities, you know, temple, the East. You know what I mean? I'm feeling like great. And Sunbar, you know, this is the thing. Sunbar was, he had a methodology with anybody who came in the band for the first time. He would have them sit right next to him. Yeah, and they would play all of the solos. And then you feel like you're like royal. You know what I'm saying? Until you see he's doing that with the next cat that comes in the band too. Right? You know, but that's how he would figure out how to use you in his scheme of things. Because that's really ultimately what it was about. It was his band, you know, and you were visiting, but he knew to find your talents to see how you fit in with what he was doing. You did.
And you played, in reference to the East Cultural Center in general, you played there with ensembles predating your involvement with the orchestra, right?
Right. I was a Brooklyn cat, man. So, you know, although I was born in Harlem, you know, Harlem evolved, you know, or I might say it devolved, you know, to where it is today. You know, Brooklyn evolved from where, you know, where Harlem was to where it is today. You know, Brooklyn is what I always felt about Harlem when I grew up. I feel the same way about Brooklyn that I felt about Harlem when I grew up. You know, it felt like it's like an African community, you know, real people. We just had a celebration last night at Sister's Place of some of the heroes in our community, right? You know, and Sister Viola Plummer, she had the pictures of all of these heroes up, and you know, and we were celebrating them. You know, that's the kind of thing that I would have thought we would have done, you know, in Harlem, you know, back in the day. But we do it now here in Brooklyn. So Brooklyn always has felt like home to me. You know, I had an uncle here who had property, and we used to go on Macon Street. We used to go and hang out at his house on the holidays like that. You know, so you know, so I always felt like Brooklyn was home. Man.
Yes. And the band, the ensembles that had a tendency to pass through that cultural center span the totality of the music, from bebop to the so-called avant-garde, which is always categorized as quote-unquote something the community can't understand. But what is your opinion about the evolution of that kind of misinformation?
It's all about misinforming people so they can't really move to change the social structure. You know, you don't have a connection to the arts. You can't move intellectually, you know, spiritually. You can't move at any point, right? You know, there's nothing that is static about our art forms. Our forms move with the people. You know, we've always moved with the people who always said, the artists who were really understanding of what it was that we were about. It's okay, that's what's happening, I'm part of that. And so I've got to make sure that that is somehow, you know, impressed upon the people who I'm here to, you know, educate. You know what I'm saying? You know, because we don't do entertainment, we do education. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
You know, it's like, you know, how am I supposed to then take what is going on in my life and make that separate from anybody else's life? We're all part of the same, you know, ancestral leanings, you know, understanding.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful, provided much clarification. We're going to go to Professor Woodard and then to Professor Mchawi, because Professor Mchawi is also going to do a visual presentation as well. So we'll go from the East Spirit House back to the East Side. And Professor Woodard, I've heard things that you said in passing before in your writings and your sayings about the functional role of the music with the social activity that was happening, and your own personal discovery within the context of what Amiri Amina Baraka were doing in Newark with Spirit House.
Yeah, well, let me start with my misdirection in the beginning. If you were back in those times and you read the Black Panther paper, they made a line between the revolutionary nationalists and the cultural nationalists. and they were saying at the time that the cultural nationalists were bourgeois. So my uncle was in Baraka's organization, and he kept trying to get me to come down to different things, and I didn't go to the plays. But Sun Ra came to town. So I went down to the, it was a public thing in the open air concert in Newark. And I went down there, and I got there early, and there were a few, I don't know if they still call them this, winos who were there. And they were generous, they offered me a drink. And when Sun Ra got there, the evening was coming, and you know how the lights come up and you feel the motion. And I saw these gentlemen get up and start dancing and twirling in the night and stuff like that. And I said, this is not bourgeois. So I said, let me go and start going to these functions and find out for myself. I'm not just going to read people's newspaper, putting people down, but let me go and see for myself. And so finally I was invited to Baraka's office. And if you read it was Brother Lorenz, wrote a couple of articles about Baraka in those early days in Ebony magazine, and he talked about this tiny office that Baraka had. And it was it was about the size of that bathroom in the back there, right? But before I got in there, I could hear him playing the piano. Baraka had a little tiny phone piano. And he would be in there in between meetings, he'd be playing his music and stuff. So anyway, make a long story short, when Baraka started inviting me up to his house, first the Spirit House was Baraka's house.
Yes.
Right, so each one of these places, music is a component part of the architecture, right? So the Spirit House at one time was also a Muslim mosque. Martin Luther King visited Baraka there about 10 days before he was assassinated. And the Spirit House was doing plays and poetry and all that. And they decided to do children's plays. And the children from that neighborhood came in, and they found out that the children couldn't read. So Amina Baraka got together with the mothers in that neighborhood, and they went up to Robert Treat Elementary School to ask the principal why the children couldn't read. And they didn't get any satisfaction. So they established the African Free School in the Spirit House. And so when it wasn't a theater on those other days, it was a school. Then Baraka moved up to the house he lives in now. And brothers used to stay at Baraka's house 24 hours a day sometimes. And we would sleep in the music room, right? And it was only later when I read his autobiography, I realized that the music room, when Baraka was a student of Sterling Brown at Howard University invited him and A.B. Spellman off campus to his legendary music room. And he pointed to the blues and jazz album and said, this is your history.
That's right.
Right, and that's the seed that later became Blues People. Right. So when Baraka sets up his house, just like his mentor, he set up a music room. So almost everything he did, like I asked him one time, I said, well, where'd you get this idea of jazz poetry? I was looking at all these books and stuff like that. He said, well, I went down to the village and I heard Langston Hughes reading jazz poetry, and he said, once I saw the master do it, I didn't have any further questions about it. So that was for me, right? So that was his. Now, when he was writing Blues People, he lived upstairs from Archie Shepp. So he was supposed to be painting the house, but he would go down and take a break and talk to Archie Shepp about the music, then go back and write, stuff like that. And according to this brother, Mackenzie Kuumba, I think he may not be with us anymore, he was an architect who grew up with Baraka. He said that Baraka, when he was writing the book, would have these, Baraka's famous for parties. I won't go into all of those parties, but anyway, he's famous for the parties. So he'd have a party, he'd play the record, ask people what you thought about it, and then he'd be typing. He said the next thing he knew, the book was out. So he didn't write the book as a lonely process. And in Baraka's house there, that's where I met Elizabeth Catlett when she came back from Mexico. That's where I met Nina Simone. Right? Nina Simone stayed at Baraka's house for, I think, at least 2 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right? He writes about it in that book, what's the name of that book? Digging. He goes into it. So Baraka's house was a place I met many musicians. They would come from West Africa. And so basically, for us in Newark, Baraka was the bridge between Newark community and the rest of the world. They would come to see him, and he would make sure that that person either performed or lectured you on what the struggle was in West Africa or whatever, wherever they were coming from, so you understand your responsibility. When we won some anti-poverty elections, and we got some of those resources, Baraka set up a jazz studies class at the anti-poverty office. And I learned the history of the drum from Milford Graves, and then Jackie Bklyn came in and lectured us on the history of the music. So every resource that Baraka had, he always devoted it to the community's education. Let's talk about some misses now. The Music Jazz Institute at Rutgers was originally a proposal that Baraka wrote. They rejected his proposal, stole the idea, and set up the Jazz Institute at Rutgers. He also wrote a proposal for a jazz radio station, which is now WBGO. So I asked him, so how do you feel? I mean, you keep coming up with these ideas and people keep stealing from you. He said, well, that's part of the history of the music. Toward the end, Baraka was writing operas and things like that. Some of the musicians I talked to who were working with him, and Blue Arc was the last group he had, said that we had never really heard the full opera because stages weren't big enough for the orchestra that required. So there's still a lot of Baraka's work that needs to be done. As he got older, he was more and more interested in people his age. So Paul Robeson became a big thing. He wanted to study everything. Paul Robeson wrote about the music and the art. And since he knew I was becoming a historian, he was trying to point out in W.E.B. Du Bois' work, if I paid attention, I'd see the poetry and the music in his writing and stuff. So I said, well, come on, you kidding me? So he would go over that, 700-page Black Reconstruction. It ends with a poem. Right? So I said, okay, all right, you got me there. And then, he goes into how important the music was in the emancipation process and stuff. So I think I'll leave it there. But I tell you, the East was really, this is an interesting, I was the editor of Baraka's newspaper. And the way I got to be the editor of his newspaper,
Unity Struggle.
It was Black Newark first,
okay.
And then we had a second edition called Unity and Struggle. And then we had a Black Newark radio program and so on and so forth. But this brother from Bklyn, Elimu, was the one who told me about the East. So, was it every Friday or every Saturday night at a certain time we had to be there to get the first set. And he would be working on this doggone thing, the newspaper. And so I said, well, man, you can finish that thing so we can get the first set. And he said, well, if you help me with the paper, we can get out of here, right? And that's how they pulled me on board, and later I became the managing editor of the newspaper. But almost everything is around the music. But I would say this, that the East and G2 Weusi, for me, was such a blessing. You come from, you hear, if you go to school and you read all the lies, they talk about the black family, the black community, and we don't care about each other and stuff like that. But all my experience with G2 was like he was a big brother to me. He would take care of me when I was getting ready to get in trouble and all kinds of stuff like that. And I think I'll leave it there and let a more expert person tell you this. About the East.
You know, one of the things that needs to be said, though, is that, you know, Kamosi is making like he's, you know, just somewhere in the background of the Committee for Unified Newark. And, you know, he's given a title by Amiri Baraka. He was Cheo Kamosi, and he was one of the brothers who was responsible for the running of the organization. So that was the Committee for Unified Newark. And then later on, in terms of the Congress of African People, which was a national organization that came after the National Black Assembly. You know, here it is, we go into 2020 and the election, and we are so disorganized. But there have been models that have been presented to us that if in fact we had taken advantage of, we wouldn't be in this dire situation that we're in right now. So, you know, as modest and humble as Kamosi is, you know, he was there going ahead and doing the people's work. Definitely. Yeah, I want to do a couple of things here. First, I want to dedicate my comments to a brother, Shaka Taylor, who made his transition a couple of weeks ago. Brother Shaka was one of the original members of the African American Students Association. He was one of the brothers who came out in when they were in junior high school to go ahead and confront state power in Ocean Hill, Brownsville. And these were some like really serious young brothers and sisters. So Brother Shaka, who interestingly enough was living in Newark, made his transition a couple of weeks ago. As a matter of fact, there was a service for him yesterday, so I'm going to go ahead and...
I didn't know that. Thanks. Yeah.
Dedicate my comments to him. We have a specific challenge right now, and that challenge is how do we collect and preserve all of what it is that we're talking about right now? That as, you know, we get older and older and older, and we know at some point we're not going to be here anymore, there's this wealth of information that we have to go ahead and do something with. That this is critical at this particular time, probably more critical than in any other time in our history, because, you know, unlike somebody like Arturo Schoenberg, who went ahead and collected thousands of books and was able to go ahead and get the Ford Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation to purchase his books and put them in a library, which later became the Schomburg Center. First it was just the 135th Street Library. We're not in that particular position right now. And all of us here in this room have stuff that is seriously, critically important. That may be sitting in a file cabinet, it may be sitting in a basement, it may be sitting somewhere, and we owe it to ourselves to do something with all of this stuff. The Schomburg can't do it. They put a whole bunch of stuff down in the basement. They had a flood. They don't want to talk about that. But they had a whole bunch of stuff down in the basement. They had a flood. And they have a bunch of stuff that they are not equipped to do anything with. They don't have the manpower. You have to remember it's part of the New York Public Library. You know, it's not an independent institution. It's part of the library system. So they have issues, and we have to address this particular question. The second thing is, as we enter into this 2020 year, we started this thing in terms of jazz and self-determination. We went out to the Left Forum and did it. And we did it at the Left Forum because here it is, you have a bunch of intellectual white folks who think that they're political and can talk to people. But when it comes to the question of culture, I don't know what they have as far as culture goes. And that if you want to talk about a revolutionary culture, you have to talk about the culture of African people. Period. If you're not talking about that, you're not talking about anything. So very often we have these white intellectuals who are talking about, you know, they are the leftists, you know, they are the socialists, they are the communists, and they have no culture. You know, they say they are dialectical materialists, and the materialism or whatever else it is taking control of this period. We have issues in terms of what we call this music that we're talking about. And I said spirit. Ahmed here talks about it is the music of the spirit. And it is this particular music which has helped all of us here evolve into who we have become. That without that music, that the culture, the other things that we went ahead, the politics, would have been empty. So we're here at this particular critical time, and we have all of these things to address. When it comes to this music now, because of the system of white supremacy and the mythology, because you know very often I refer to it as the mythology of white supremacy, because they have to make white supremacy up because they know what the deal is. They know that there is no white supremacy, that is a myth. Okay? But in the context of that, this music that Ahmed and Kamosi is talking about has been taken away from our people. Capitalism has something to do with it. We know that. But you go to some events in which this music of the spirit is presented, and the audience is 80 to 90% European. Now they understand what the deal is, which is why they're there. But the question, of course, is, what about our people? And what has happened? We used to be out at 10 Clever Place, and you know, people would say, well, you know, Sunrise Strange or something. Sunrise would be out, and everybody and their mama would be out in the street. 10 Clever Place, when we started what has become the International African Arts Festival, everybody would be there. The winos that Kamosi is talking about, who would dance and spin to this music, which literally moved them. So one of the things in collecting and preserving all of this is that an archive is not just a repository. It is the creation of knowledge. And in creating this knowledge, this is knowledge that we have to go ahead and give back to our people. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered. I was a student at New York University. And you know, first of all, you know, we were all taken by the fact that these evil people could execute a man of peace, of nonviolence. We understood to an extent the radical aspect of King, which everybody wants to keep away from everybody. But I have to tell you that myself, and some of my other comrades, we went to Slugs that evening, and Cecil Taylor was there. Cecil, who was known for tearing up people's pianos in clubs, did so much damage to that piano that night that I know Slugs did not want to see him, because they knew they were going to have to pay piano tuners and technicians to put that piano back together. But Frank Wright was playing with it then.
Wow.
Right on.
And Frank Wright, I mean, the night was just unbelievable in regards to the particular music that was played. I can't even almost tell you. You know, words are not sufficient. But after that, myself and my brothers and sisters, we were ready to go ahead and do battle. That music of the spirit had shored us up. So that next day, we went back to NYU and we shut that school down.
Yes, sir.
And kept it shut down until the administration had to essentially sue for peace. Now, that's just an example of what this music means to us. What function. You know, it's not just that we like it, it's who we are. So many people talk about music is our heartbeat, because it is. So, in light of this preservation, what I did is I talked to Ron Warwell, who was the artist who was responsible for most of the flyers that we did to advertise the East weekend sets. So I spoke with Ron. Ron now lives in Florida. And we had a good conversation. And I said, well, listen, you know, Ron, I want to go ahead and use some of your stuff in terms of this presentation that we're doing. So he said, fine, but that's what it's for. Of course, I wanted to ask his permission. Now, aside from all of this, that in terms of the photographs from the East, you know, I've shown a few photographs before, you know, at the Left Forum, you know, that one of the things we did is, you know, I have had the responsibility on occasion of working the weekend sets. So we would work, and you know, we would move up the ladder as, you know, we got better and better in terms of what we did. You know, you started to be in charge of the kitchen, and you might be in charge of the door, and then as you got better and better, you'd be in charge of everything. You'd be in charge of the entire operation. So, as I moved up, one of the things I said is, well, I need to bring my camera with me so I can capture some of this. And we've had a number of photo exhibits that we've done. We've done photo exhibits in the community, right on Fulton Street. We did Skylight Gallery at Restoration Plaza. You know, we've done a few. We have to do more. And as this technology changes, I mean, one of the things that I said I was going to do is, well, you know, I'm going to do some, present some photos, but, you know, it's a lot of work. So the next time we do something, I'm going to go ahead and, you know, pull some more photos and do some things with them. But the interesting thing, of course, is I took some of Ron Warwell's work, and there's enough work here for you to look at and keep you busy, keep your mind and spirit busy for a while. So that was enough. To go ahead and do Ron and do myself at the same time in terms of some photos, that would be a bit much. So I know, of course, Ras, who needs to be commended for keeping this going, because, you know, we said we needed to do it, and the brothers have been running with it. You know, we've been at the Left Forum, we were at the People's Forum, we've been here at 388 Atlantic Avenue, you know, we're going to be some other places, I'm sure, but the brother's been running with it, and he definitely needs to be commended.
Thank you for the work you all been doing.
Now, you know, I need to say, I've been talking about Sun Ra. I got Sun Ra story. We have to do something just on Sun Ra. Yeah, I got Sun Ra stories. We all got some Sun Ra stories.
You mentioned something about what constituted the majority of who was showing up for certain things artistically, you think that music with a certain kind of content that happens to be negative was put in the community as an intentional construct to affect the cognitive development of later generations of young people,
Well,
young African people?
several things have happened. One thing that happened, you have to remember, when they cut the school budget, the first thing they cut are the arts. They cut the music, they cut the visual arts, they cut that out first as if in fact our children don't need that. When they need that very often more than everything else. We know that when, you know, young people are good in music and art, the other academics fall right into place most often. So they cut that out. That's why, you know, somebody like Chuck D from Public Enemy will talk about, well, that's why we had to start sampling. We couldn't play the instrument, so we had to take somebody else who was playing the instrument and take their music. You know, James Brown, you know, he made a record with Full Force when he came back, something called I'm Real.
Yeah, I remember that.
Where he said, take your name off my record.
No static, right? Yeah.
Said, take your name off my record. Because in those days, the sampling was so new, there was no licensing agreement or whatever. People were just stealing people's music, and they weren't paying anybody for it. So that was the first thing. The other thing we know is that this phenomena of this negative, gangster, you know, calling women out their names, music, if that's what you want to call it, was created and it was pushed. Because there's always been positive music. We can name the positive groups that don't go as far as some of the negative groups do. We can name X-Clan, you know, we can talk about, you know, Public Enemy, you know, PE went, you know, they went somewhere. You can talk about so many groups that were making positive music that the record companies were not pushing. They decided to go ahead and push the musings of fake gangsters and wannabe thugs. And that's what happened. So now, the problem is that there's no exposure. You can't go to the club for $2. When the music is presented, you know, you go to the club, you gotta pay. You and your lady, you and your man, you and your whomever, that's $100. That's $100. You know, which unfortunately all of our people don't have to go ahead and blow on an evening or whatever. Now there are some exceptions. You know, Sister's Place is still, you know, doing something and that, but the idea of our music being presented in the community, which was one of the concepts in terms of the East.
Right.
That if we go ahead and create this place, the people will come. And not only will the people come, but the musicians will come. And folks will just, I mean, listen, I mean, they were fighting, you know, the musicians were fighting to get into the East to go ahead and play. You know, we didn't have to always call them. They would be calling us. You know, and the people who did that work, G2, of course, G2AUC, Mensah Wali, who's in Pittsburgh now, you know, keeping that work going. You know, he's, oh yeah, well, you know, I mean, that, Brother Maliki, who was going ahead and doing the booking and then the recording, Amiri. It's interesting, you know, these young brothers who were in ASA, they started going ahead and doing this as teenagers and they became professional engineers. You know, Maliki, Amiri is the chief engineer for, I don't know what, one of these radio conglomerates now. They have them traveling all over the country going ahead and doing this work. But they started it right at 10 Claver Place. That's where they started as teenagers. And then, you know, Kamosi mentioned Yusef Iman, who was the spirit man. You know, much of what we know in terms of, well, our children know, because we have all these songs that we do in terms of Kwanzaa and the 7 principles and many of these things. These songs were created by this brother, Yusef Iman. And when Yusef went ahead and created them, and we taught them, so now, you know, my children know the songs, they taught them to their children, and now we're going to the great-grandchildren in terms of them knowing those particular songs. So if they want to know about Kwanzaa, the 7 principles, and the red, black, and green, these are songs that Yusef Iman went ahead and created. You know, as part of the ritual, you know, the ritualization of some of the things that we believe in. But, you know, I guess, you know, we'll take some questions or something, and then I'll hit this visual stuff here.
Yeah, a few more, little more conversation, and then maybe is it okay to use the visuals to lead into the Q&A once you do that? Okay.
Can I say something about the loss of the music?
Yeah.
And that when we do the algebra project with Bob Moses, some of the children from the African Free School had graduated and were leading the algebra project. And one of the ways that we teach algebra is through the music. People say, I don't know nothing about algebra. People say, do you know anything about music? Do you play cards? And then we show them, they're doing the music, they're doing, and say, well, you just did some math. We break it down that way, right? So Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer, explained the colonial project or the racist project is to separate the head from the body of the African. And much of our literature, going all the way back to Egypt, is to remember, to reconstruct what the colonial project has taken apart. So we are wounded people when we don't have our music. And part of getting this music back is part of the healing, right, process. Anyway, I wanted to say that. It's his book, Something Torn and New.
Yes. And jazz ensembles were an integral part of the presentations that Spirit House was doing at the time, right?
Yeah. And Yusef was over there. So if you don't, the one album you don't have there is Soul and Madness.
I forgot to bring that one.
Yeah,
sorry.
so that's, you see Baraka and Yusef, everybody's in front of the Spirit House.
On the porch, yeah.
And they're using in the background that great poet from Detroit, Smokey Robinson, baby, in the back of the beautiful black women and stuff like that. So it was to appreciate the bards from the other towns and understand them for who they were, right? They were those great poets and teenagers.
Did you frequent the previous space in Harlem that preceded Spirit House when Amiri made that transition?
Oh,
did your association with him go back that far? Okay.
Sad to say, did you ever go?
I guess I missed most of that, because I mean it's about, you know, you're talking about
way back
65,
right after Brother Malcolm was assassinated. Right. 65.
Interestingly, I moved out of Harlem just when Amiri Baraka was moving up to Harlem. I was moving down to the Lower East Side. Right? So I was pretty much ensconced on the Lower East Side. So, but I knew of it because, you know, I had real ties to the community because it was really a block and a half from where I grew up. It was 108 West 130th Street. And I grew up on 49 East 131st Street. So it was really like a block right around the corner from me. So, you know, it's the fact, you know, because, you know, the bars was only there for like 6 months.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You know, but the power, you know, of what it was that they created, because you're talking about, you know, bringing the artists back into the community from which they come from, you know, and strengthening them, you know, with the people. You know, what they did was something that lasted for a long time. I mean, John Coltrane did his very last concert on 125th Street at Olatunji's, you know, and that was like a year and a half later.
And you were there, you were
I was
present
there for that.
I
You
was
know?
there.
Yeah, 20 years old, I was there, and, you know, and the community was there. I mean, the place was sold out, the place was packed, it was a large, you know.
And that's interesting,
auditorium. Yeah.
because John Coltrane's last band is categorized as
Really,
categorized in so many negative ways, and what you've mentioned before in the past, and what Professor Basir has mentioned, and Mr. Kamosi as well, about the reception to that music was kind of counter to a lot of the information that came out later about that band that might not be true as far as black people's reception of the music in that form. But it seems like, you know, the whole music was a holistic process that was embraced as a whole by the community. And that was John's band with Pharaoh and Rashid Ali. And what was the audience reception like?
Tremendous. You know, people, it was a symbiotic relationship between the audience, you know, and the musicians. It was just like being at the East. You know, but this was Alatunji's cultural center, man. You know, it was powerful.
And it was a little before the East too, because that was 67.
Yeah, that's right, That's 67, that's right.
You know, it was Archie Shepp, when I was in graduate school, who came up, he said, you know, if you're gonna write a dissertation, you should do it on the Black Arts Movement. And you know, the sad thing is that a lot of the books on the Black Arts Movement now, there's starting to be a little library there,
Yeah.
but most of them are not about the music, right? They talking about print media and stuff, which is cool, But to leave the music out, I keep telling them, you don't really know why people were there in the first place to see the place. You're missing the whole point if you're missing the music, man.
Right.
But we, like I mentioned, we do have some dissertations now. Salim Washington has written his dissertation on Coltrane.
Yes.
Kwame has written his dissertation on the East. And we have to get those things in print, or at least on the web, so people can start reading that information there.
Right.
Absolutely. And a parallel thing that you just mentioned as well was the kind of changes that happened with the New York Musicians Organization when they made that concession to George Wein. Do you think that the issues that Mr. Basir just brought up in reference to staying true with the necessary coalition that we have to have that will present a kind of co-optation like that?
Well, what musicians knew then was that we had to band together. I don't think the musicians know that as well today. You know, there was an emergency. You know, the fact that this guy was coming to New York and he was going to, like, you know, not utilize any New York musicians necessarily, or nobody that we knew, you know, so it was immediate. I don't think it's as immediate with folks today to understand, you know, how serious the situation is. There's always been a glut in New York in terms of, you know, the number of musicians who come here and the number of opportunities there are for those musicians who are here. That's always been the case, and it will always be the case, because New York is the center of, you know, of capitalism. You know, so people come here for fame and fortune. Some find it, most don't. You know, and the fact is that if people don't understand at this point that is not going to stop unless we, in a self-determinative understanding, proactively do something, you know, to change it. It will continue.
Absolutely. And you once mentioned before about John Coltrane, Olatunji, and Yusef Lateef forming something.
They had formed, that concert, April 1967 was the concert. It was called John Coltrane in Africa. And it actually was an organization that John Coltrane, Olatunji, right, had, along with Yusef Lateef, had organized to create a whole series of events that were about African musicians coming out of Africa. That was called John Coltrane in Africa, in fact, you know. It never happened because John Coltrane died 3 months after that concert.
Yeah.
You know, the concert was April 1967. He died in July 1967.
July 17th.
The other thing is, though, John Coltrane was getting ready to start his own recording company.
That's right.
If you remember, Cosmic Music,
That's
in
right.
its first edition,
That's right.
was put out by
That's right.
the Coltrane
Coltrane
family.
family. That's right.
All right.
Yeah.
It happened after he had made his transition,
That's right.
but it was, you know, very clearly part of what his intention was.
That's right. That's right.
So, you know, you can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, as you know, the drummer Rashid Ali, who was integral to John Coltrane's later music, kind of kept that going. He actually had a label called Survival Records.
Not only did he have a label, he had a place that he opened that musicians could perform at.
Right.
And then he created a studio in the basement of that, you know. It is still there, you know, it's in Soho. I mean, 77 Green Street, I mean, you know, prestigious address now, you know, that's like a multi-million-dollar address. But he was able to understand it because he worked with John Coltrane. He was able to understand the importance of owning your own. So he got the place, you know, he and his wife, Patricia, who's still alive, they got the place. He made a place available to other musicians. You know, I wouldn't have a reputation to be up here on the stage for whatever this reputation is that I'm up on the stage with, you know, talking to anybody if it hadn't been for people like Rashid Ali and Sam Rivers and Jolie Wilson. You know, these are people who create venues where we could play at, where we could develop our own reputation. Because they weren't having us play in the clubs. You know, we could play in the East, but we couldn't play in any of the New York clubs. So they created venues where it was possible for us to develop reputations enough to be able to have somebody record us so that we can then go out and earn a living at what it is that we said we were doing. We said we were musicians. Well, you can't be a musician if you ain't got a gig. You can't feed your family. You know, what you gonna say? You know?
Right. And Professor, thank you, absolutely. And Professor Woodard, you know, Amiri Baraka's mid-60s writings focused on the music that evolved out of bebop that got mistakenly characterized as avant-garde. But and would you say that he played a major role in whatever knowledge was gained by the music in that particular form, just to tie that in with what Mr. Ahmed just said in reference to that, because in black music, for instance, he wrote about a lot of those people who were playing in later developments. And bebop, of course, was included, was certainly not neglected. Everything was mentioned in the totality, because you can't have one without the other. He was
definitely trying to promote the new music. You know, Baraka would look at the walls in the schools. You go to the schools and see a blank wall, and he said, these walls are teaching ignorance. Mm-hmm. You could say the same thing about what we hear when we go to school, right? And your mind is not really being challenged if you can't. So we tried a number of times. Matter of fact, Arts High School, who's that brother who played in the Black Panther? He comes from Arts High School. The brother who played the villain and
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about, muscular brother. Yeah, he's from Arts High School. Yeah. Well, we tried to name that John Coltrane High School. It didn't work. But we did change the other school from Southside to Malcolm X High School. And we changed Harriet Tubman School, Marcus Garvey School, and all that stuff like that. But it is interesting that they defeated us when we tried to change the school to John Coltrane. But there's no reason. I mean, if you think about how much every city pays for education or miseducation, to not have jazz being taught in the schools is part of the problem. You know, our children are not. I mean, it's. Matter of fact, after I read Blues People in college, I asked my music teacher, who was teaching me an introduction to music. I said, "Well, when are we going to get to blues and jazz?" And he said, "This is a white dude." He said, "Young man, you're in college now. Blues and jazz is not music. And he proceeded to give me an F. It's the only F I ever got. I said, this must be important enough for him to like call me out like that and then give me an F too. So that's when I went to Baraka and started saying, well, what is this thing about? It must be more than just the sounds here, right? This dude declared war on me because
The question.
And now here's something else. You know, I started doing radio at the East. We had a radio program called View from the East. Now, I had no intention of going into radio at all. I was the editor of Black News, so I did print. So I got an assignment from G2AUC. He said, you gotta go do this radio program. And I'm like, what? I don't wanna do any radio, what are you talking about? So I did it, and then I guess over time I got kind of good at it. But I've had the opportunity to interview Amiri Baraka on radio in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. We did at WBAI a John Coltrane Day back, I can't even remember what year it was now, I have to look at the folio because we used to put out this monthly schedule called the folio. And that month, the cover was John Coltrane, and we had an essay inside and the schedule for that particular day, which included an interview with Amiri Baraka. I think we did an interview with A.B. Spellman. We had live music. We had Khalik Abdul Rauf play, and you know, we had a lot of things going on, and we were trying to play music that people at that point, mainly live music that was, you know, at that time, not much in the public ear. But the interview I did with him for that show with Amiri Baraka, he said that he had a manuscript for a book on Coltrane, but nobody would publish it. Okay? That he had a manuscript on John Coltrane completed, but nobody would publish it.
And he has one on Max Roach.
That's right, yeah. Remember they started that.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask Mr. Ahmed one more question, and then we'll go to Professor Basir's visuals, and that'll lead into a collective Q&A if you had any to contribute. But Albert Ayler and his unfortunate passing, what was his passing and the way he was found? Did that have an impact on the musicians community? That's not spoken of as much. It's kind of like a sideline, but was that particular scenario, how did it affect the black creative musicians community? Because I know Mr. Basir told me once that Albert was actually scheduled to play at the East, but did that untimely.
Well, I do know, I remember when people found Albert Ayler's body in the East River. But you know, the thing with musicians is that you can die and they may find your body, you know, like 2 months later, you know, they talk about it 3 months later, you know. So things happen very slowly within the jazz community as far as, you know, learning about the fact that somebody has left the planet, you know. So I don't think that people really knew, knew at the time that he had passed, you know, until much later, past the time that he had passed, you know, like that.
And John Coltrane's passing.
John Coltrane,
that
was something that was very different because
how
people
was
knew about that. You know, there was a major article in the New York Times that created a whole thing within the community. I mean, you know, the funeral of John Coltrane was, it was packed at St. Peter's Church, 54th Street. You know, I mean, people were all outside there.
Did you attend that?
Of course I did.
Wow.
Like he was a member of my family. You know, I was like right there, man. As was anybody else who loved John Coltrane, man.
We lost him and Langston Hughes that month, July '67.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
We were kind of busy with the uprising, but when the smoke cleared, we realized we had lost two great ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. And one more question. Musically, and we'll get our sound person to help facilitate the visual.
We got it. I think we're all right.
Okay. And what was Larry Neal's impact on that?
Oh, wow. Now, you know, Larry Neal, after my man gave me the F in school, I came back to Harlem to try to get my bearings. And I knew that everybody was talking about this book, Black Fire.
Oh, yeah.
So I went to, I think it was Michelle's bookstore on 125th Street. And, you know, the back cover of that original had a picture of two dudes standing there looking, you know, militant. And there was a brother standing next to me, smiling, and that was Larry Neal. So he embraced me, asked me what I was studying, took me out for a cup of coffee, and became my mentor. And see, so I asked him for a list of books. And I applied to do an independent study, and from that point on, I was studying the Black Arts Movement at a white college. And he was the one that said, well, since you're from Newark, Leroy Jones is over there. So that's how and he gave me a list of books that you could only find in certain places about Neo-African literature and stuff like that. And first and last, I think, was the name of Mr. Jones's bookstore. That's Amiri's father.
Okay. His father had a bookstore.
First and last. Which had all these books that you couldn't find anywhere else. So I went in there to get the book, and he said, you know, my son's doing a play, why don't you come? And there was this beautiful sister who happened to be one of the actresses in the thing behind the counter. I said, yeah, I'll be there. And so I fell in love with the theater too.
Extra incentive.
You know, we were young people at the time, so that's
Right.
that part of it.
Yeah.
But it was a family thing. His father was very supportive of him, despite, you know, there's all kinds of stories about that. But his father basically recruited me first.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate this learning experience and all the clarification, the right clarification about the true history. And I think, Mr. Basir, you wanted to do a visual?
Yeah, I got some of,
and from there we'll go into the Q&A.
Flyers.
From that point, whatever questions you had for our panel.
Take a look at some of these things. Now, what I did is I scanned these. These were like low resolution scans. But I'm just going to kind of go through them in no particular order. But, I mean, to get an idea, you know, there's always this issue in terms of visual art, and I don't think all of these are Orwell, but of course, you know, one of the things we wanted to do in terms of the East is we wanted to go ahead and attract people to it. So of course, one of the ways that you would go ahead and do that is through the visuals. So I just have you know, just a number of things that that are here.
Do you remember who the artist is for this?
I can't say. This doesn't look like Orwell. It might be, and it might be because you know it was either early or it was rough. Because as you will see, that Orwell, in terms of his later work, I mean, it is very, very detailed. It's interesting because there's at the top, there's a quote from Sekou Touré, who was the president of Guinea.
What, do you know what year this was?
I can't tell exactly. We'll have to, you know, go ahead and, you know, just kind of figure out in terms of what year was that?
Yes.
Well, Dewey Redmond and Eddie.
This was, and I'll just get rid of this one here, and I'll put them in some kind of order eventually so I can really just go ahead and pull these things out. You know, this is Freddie Hubbard, and this is, you know, very clearly the work of Ron Orwell. Wow. You know, and it's interesting because I was talking with Ron and come to find out that he went to art school with Ilambe, Rath, and Kwame. Now, the interesting thing that you may not know about Ilambe is that Ilambe was a very talented graphic artist. He wrote, he created this coloring book.
Color Us Colored.
Yeah, Color Us Colored, which is so funny. I mean, he made so much fun of the Negro integrationists, man. It is just amazing in regards to this particular work. He called it Color Us Colored. It was a coloring book. So yeah, I've got to do these scans, you know, in little higher definition, you know, doing bigger. But I mean, you know, you get an idea of the work that went into, you know, just going in. It wasn't a matter of just, you know, going ahead and doing the sets. And what happened is that all of this actually ended up becoming, you know, literally a work of art. It wasn't only the music. It was also what we had to do in terms of, you know, presenting the music itself.
It's sad to say when they do these exhibits on the Black Arts Movement, this is the art that's excluded.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And they did the Black Power exhibit at the Schomburg, and they had work by another of our artists, say to Jim Dyson, and had it wrongly attributed to someone else.
I can believe it.
So as a matter of fact, I mean, a few of these might be say two's work actually. I mean, you know, we would have to really go ahead and see.
The interesting thing about that period is most of the artists didn't put their name on it. It was, you know, it's a different period of time.
Anonymous.
It's for the community.
Starving artists.
Yeah, now we could probably go ahead and, you know, find the years. And a couple of folks, as I understand it, kept pretty good records in regards to, you know, what years and what dates various folks played. But I mean, you can see just the depth in terms of those people who appeared at the East. You know, this was not, you know, people was not shucking and jiving in regards to going ahead and dealing with this.
It's a place to be.
Yeah.
What year?
Excuse me, are all these images from the Black News?
No, these are actually scans of actual flyers. In most instances, a couple of them may have actually appeared in Black News, because one of the things that we would do is that we would actually go ahead and you know, use sometimes the back cover or somewhere inside we would advertise the weekend sets. So these are actually four that were actually, you know, all 8.5 by 11 or larger in some instances. One of the things we used to do all the time is we had posters.
Right.
And what happened is you would be on the poster crew, and what you would do is you would try to put your poster somewhere where people could see it, but nobody would be able to take it down. So that 2 months later you would go say, yeah, you see that poster way up there? I put that up there.
But we would also get them when we went to the East. We would get flyers like that to take home with us.
Yeah.
So we would be reminded of what was coming.
Yeah, because some people have collections.
That's
I
right.
believe this. Now, this is the back cover. This is the back cover of the anniversary booklet. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the East, and we had a commemorative booklet. This is the back cover, and here is the front cover. So there you've got you know, a lot of stuff, including right there in the middle, G2, young G2 when his hair was not all gray. His hair got gray real early. He was not old when his hair started getting gray. And yeah, a couple of photographs from the East and its time. we're gonna try to see if we can make this available, I guess maybe at the International African Arts Festival this coming year. Because it's a limited edition. But as a matter of fact, most of the flyers that I'm showing you now are actually in this commemorative book. So that, some other photographs, and essays by a number of folks who were part of the East organization. Shep, Andrew, Surreal, and then Dialogue in the Drum.
Jane Cortez.
Rashid, Andrew, and Milford. With Jane Cortez as the opening act.
Charles Sullivan. Wow. Yeah, come on. I mean, this is Sam Rivers. Stafford James.
Oh, look.
Oh,
Yeah.
And
With Andrew Surreal over here. My own.
that's an interesting.
Andrew for real, yeah.
Charles Sullivan, Lonnie Liston Smith, Sam Rivers, and Stafford James. Damn, that's Carlos, yeah, he's one of those great.
Well, you know, Carlos, you know, he was at the East all the time, one way or the other. You know, he was one of those folks or whatever for sure.
Yeah.
And then you see Spirit House Movers and Players,
Yeah.
December 24th and 25th.
And Betty Carter was at that thing that raised the money for the first Barts in Harlem. Coltrane was there, all those people.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you just look at this. I mean, you know, Universal Black Force. You know, you got there Carlos Moore, Kiani Zawadi, Joe Bonner, Hakeem Jamid, Norman Connors, Charles Pulliam, Ron Warwell. The artist actually played percussion on this. Now, up in the right corner, you can see that's Ron's logo. So, I mean, you know that this is Ron's work for sure. And then over in the lower left-hand corner, you see his logo as well.
You know, the connection is Carlos did so, he became such a well-known entity from working at the East that he became the music director at Sister's Place before I was there, right? He was the first music director at Sister's Place for the first year and a half at Sister's Place. And then when he and Viola had a falling out, she asked me to come in. And I've been there for the last 23 years.
And Carlos is in Panama now.
He's in Panama, yeah.
Yeah. I understand that he's having some
Carlos Moore, yes. All the cats.
Well, that's what Sterling Brown meant. He said, "This is your history."
That's it. That's it, yeah.
And I mean, you can just see in terms of, I mean, you know, the work in terms of the drawings and stuff. I mean, as time went on, it just got better and better.
Did RVR cover some of the publicity for these events?
No, RVR, you know, didn't. I mean, gotta say, you know, the East had a policy of it was for people of African descent. Okay, and as such, you know, that was it. So everybody couldn't get in.
Yeah. It was hard to get. You had to be there by a certain time, or you couldn't even get a seat.
And be on time, right?
Those of us from New Jersey, that's what we would do.
You had to travel far.
Otherwise, you locked out. You stand outside and listen.
Black artists.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention the CD.
70.
Now this is Seytu's work. I can tell. This is Seytu Jim Dyson. This is not Ron Warwell. And this is 1970.
Oh, you got the date on.
Yeah, this one had December 17, 1970.
Eddie Gale's Ghetto Music.
Yeah. Fulton Street.
That's Gene Coleman in the corner. Maybe he was on that. You were playing with Eddie, right?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
Yeah, Cecil.
I was playing basketball.
That is interesting that we really put the year on there. I guess we were so consumed with our own time.
Yeah. We were in the moment. In the moment.
Put it out.
In the moment, you know what I'm saying?
Max Roach.
Jim Lyons.
Max appeared. I don't know if I've got a Max flyer there, but there must be one.
He's right up there.
Oh, there's the South African poet.
Yeah, look at that. Pet
Yes, sir.
Silly.
Yeah.
Little Willie.
South African. My brother
Yeah.
from South Africa.
Yeah.
Coca City. Wow. Look at that.
So, that's it. These are in terms of some of the scans that I did.
Brilliant.
I think it's important, but again, as I'm saying, the challenge now is actually going ahead, collecting and preserving, because now, as Kamosi will tell you, we're dealing with second and third iterations of what happened. You got somebody who wasn't there talking to somebody who wasn't there about somebody, about somebody who was there. So, we've got, 2 and 3 iterations removed now.
Yeah.
And there are still some people who are around who were there.
Yes, sir.
You
So,
know, in terms
it's
of the
important.
art, it's the amazing thing that they're leaving out the Talasimus. And I tried to tell them, you got all these museum things, but we were the Talasimu that people wore around their neck. Everybody was wearing African art. That was the big thing.
Yeah.
And for you to do this big exhibit and not have a Talasimu here, you're missing the point.
Now, who was the brother? Because there was a brother.
The brother from
Newark.
LA.
No, there was a brother from Newark who made Talasimus out of wood.
Yeah, but he was from LA and then he came to Newark.
Okay.
He's still around.
Really?
Yeah, he's still around and they never invite him to the exhibits. He's alive, you know.
Well, I got my Talasimus.
Yeah, but he would do handcrafted Talasimus for each person.
Yeah, and what happened is, at the East, there were 2 things. Number one, there's a Talasimu that's associated with the yes organization. And the one that they do in wood, I have to say, is, a little less artistic than the ones that this brother from LA who ended up coming to Newark actually made. Subsequently, there was one that was done in silver.
Yeah.
That was good.
That was my economic development project to make the
that was
silver
based on the Talasimu, which is, a little necklace piece that we would wear. So that was your economic development piece?
And the
That's a good
national
piece.
dress suit.
Yeah. Well, we had our store Mavazi,
Oh, yeah.
and sisters could make those.
The East had one of the best economic development operations in the country. I was in charge of going from town to town to examine people's economic projects. And I was always most impressed with the East. And Pittsburgh had a phenomenal economic development thing too.
Yeah.
But what you're looking at young people who had adults guiding them, and it just was amazing what all they could do. All the kids that they told us were not going to make it and weren't worth any attention, once they got into the movement, they flowered.
Yeah, we're going to get a panel back up on the stage for our Q&A portion. And that's a great Romeo right there who's been doing a lot of what we've been talking about on this panel. And thanks for your works, man.
Matter of fact, there's a documentary in the making.
Yeah, Black Theater documentary my son and I put together on Black Theater, and you're a part of it, my brother. Thank you. And we have to have Baraka's influence in Black Theater at that time. This is, I call it mob-tastic, what you guys are doing here, and we've got to let our history be known, you know, because like you said, it could get lost and they can wipe us out. You know, just look at a YouTube, this white man talking about white supremacy and how we're nothing and all this. You know, if you just go through the books, or if he just sit his ass down here and listen to you guys, he'll go home and bury himself, you know, because we are a strong people, and we have the music. It's like you said, it's in the music. You know, all our history is right there in the music. Started with the drum.
Let me tell you something. I call them cave monkeys. They judge us by themselves. They are inferior. These are people that just came out of a cave 6,000 years ago. So that is the reason why they judge us by themselves.
No audience members, just the panels.
Yeah.
Huh?
Just take pictures of
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very
Didn't
much.
mean to.
No, thank you. Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, I'm going to some more music history through the great Barry Harris.
All right,
So,
yeah, Barry
enjoy
Harris.
this immensely. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes,
And yeah,